on AM 560. The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Jim Gaffigan had it about right last week at the Al Smith dinner in his set. Gaffigan talking about all of those assembled on the dais, former politicians, other formers.
You know, we have a lot of formers on the dais tonight, all right? Former mayors, former governors, former respected journalists. Is there any other kind, really? Now, I understand some people may have an issue with a journalist appearing on a dais, hobnobbing with the rich and powerful. It would appear like a clear conflict of interest, and that's because it absolutely is.
They're showing their good humor, laughing at themselves. If any of those former respected journalists, quote unquote, respected journalists, respected in front of journalists is sort of like reverend in front of Al Sharpton. Okay. And speaking of which, the misdirection play the left is using to hide their censorious agenda, and I mean that sort of globally. It's not limited to the First Amendment, of course. Donnie Deutsch, these guys on MSNBC.
Who's Donnie Deutsch?
He's been there forever.
Oh,
He's some former New York ad exec or something who turned like political commentator.
He knows it all.
Donnie Deutsch and the aforesaid Reverend, in quotation marks, Al, on what Trump's administration would portend for these former, although they were never respected journalists, of course, but what it would portend for important people who are purveyors of the truth, like Donnie Deutsch and Reverend Al. These are the people that represent the vanguard of our representative republic, they'll have you know.
I still can't figure out, do they not believe it or do they not care? Do they not understand that our freedom is on the line? Do they not get that, or do they just not care? Do they take freedom for granted at this point? And I challenge people, and I say, you do understand that he will turn on this country, and he will turn us into Hungary. Do you not understand the freedoms that started, as you brought it up, it started with Roe v. Wade. It will continue. It will continue by putting his enemies in jail. It will continue on having unfree media. Are there people around this table that are really worried? Rev, are you worried going forward that you're on a list if Donald Trump is elected? Yes or no?
I'm convinced I'll be on the list.
I am too.
I don't know how we're not going to be.
And think about that. This is America. This is the United States of America, and people in the media, like the Rev, have to be concerned that they may be on a list. I have people saying to me, Donnie, are you worried? This is America.
A little hyperbole there.
For more on this, please be joined by Daniel Klein, professor of economics at George Mason University, author of Misinformation is a Word We Use to Shut You Up. Professor Klein, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for bringing me back, Dan and Amy.
So, per the luminary Donnie Deutsch, which is it with you? Do you not understand that Donald Trump is a threat to your freedom, or do you just not care?
I'll be voting for Trump, and I think I guess the projection is the word that jumps to mind. I think there's no question that the propaganda and the censorship coming from the left is extreme. It's a big agenda. We see it very much in play in other countries, especially now in Britain, which is horrifying what's going on. Not that I'm super up on it, but it's very clear that it's very bad there and aggressive. I think it's part of a playbook. We see it in Canada. We see it in Brazil. We see it in Australia. And we're getting it here. It's also very much happening here. And that's their agenda, I feel. So it's upside down what the guy's saying.
But who's going to determine what hate speech is? I mean, you have John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, even Tim Walz, the vice presidential candidate, talking about it, that misinformation is going to be, eliminated from social media.
Of course, they are the arbiters of what's hate speech and what's mis or disinformation. They can't come out and be honest and say, we are shutting down, false think or false speech. They can't just come out and say, we say this is false and we're shutting it down. They have to try to narrow it down as though it's an error of information, which is not the whole sense of truth. Information is a word traditionally used when content like a telephone number is in form, like information in form, like listed in a telephone directory. And what they're censoring are much broader claims about judgment and about interpretation, and they just want to impose their interpretation, not their information, their interpretation, their preferred judgment, their preferred narrative. That's what it's all really about, but they're trying to disguise it by trying to turn it into a matter of someone speaking misinformation as though it's a cut and dried matter, which it absolutely isn't. Well, and like you say, they'll be the ones, they got their gallery full of their people to bring down the hammer, the coercion on those who say things that they don't like.
Well, the other thing, and this has been afoot for a long time, and as most bad cultural trends, it really incubated on college campuses, which is this idea that speech I don't like is violence. And I just sort of invent speech I don't like as the proximate cause for events that nobody likes. So, for example, I'm opposed to puberty blockers and gender reassignment surgery for minors. And then a trans person gets beaten up. It was my hate speech that created the climate that allowed for that violence. Therefore, my speech is violence, and I need to be censored.
Yeah, I mean, we have this whole great tradition of Western society, Western civilization that allowed people to speak thoughts others disagreed with, thoughts that others found offensive, and that's what free speech and the whole arc of the American founding and what it came out of was all about. And they're turning that upside down with what you say. And what they really mean is just double standards where their people are going to decide what's prohibited speech. So it's basically a big totalitarian play. It's really terrible.
And the ease at which people like Bill Gates talk about of course I believe in free speech, but I mean, not if you're going to be saying things like people shouldn't get your COVID shot. No, of course, that's beyond the pale. But the ease at which they say something like that tells me how far they've advanced that idea among the larger American electorate, or at least half of it.
I think they have CCP envy. That is the Chinese Communist Party. And honestly, I think their tendency, even if it's unconscious or subconscious with them, is that they want to turn America into a Chinese Communist Party's type regime. Look at California. And where their people have control all the levers, all the guns, and they're going to they're going to free themselves of hearing speech that they don't approve of or don't agree with.
And they've done a good job. I mean, there's, this is not limited to the left, but there is a wide swath of the American electorate that is siloed. They listen to their particular outlet of choice and nothing else gets in. So they're stunned when something occurs that that they didn't anticipate, but they had no idea because they never contemplated other possibilities than what they're being told is the righteous path.
Yes, they're not being taught the whole sort of virtuous tradition of liberty of the West and of the American founding in particular. And not only not being taught that, but they're, like you say, they're being told stuff that goes directly against it, that speech is violence and tantamount to violence and can be punished comparably to violence, which is a totally pernicious, totally anti-Western, and let me say anti-liberal in the original political sense, an anti-liberal idea.
What's your posture towards social media companies? Because this is something that crosses the political spectrum in terms of holding them to account on the one hand for from the left, opinions they don't want other people to get access to. And then to some extent on the right, it's the suppressing, Google manipulating search results or suppressing posts on behalf of the left. So how do you come down with respect to these public squares, if you will?
I would like to try to maintain a kind of laissez-faire point of view in that I think if the government itself were not twisting arms and using carrots and sticks on those platforms themselves, that we would have correction mechanisms there where people would go to X now with Elon, they would go to Rumble, they would do this, they would do that. But look what they're doing. They're actually using their stick against Rumble very viciously and aggressively. So I'm inclined still to say that platforms are private entities, and that if they want to censor, if they want to, let's call it, let's say suppress or even deplatform people whose views they don't like, that's their call. I do think they should be honest about it to their users. And then competition, the marketplace of ideas, competing platforms. But what we have is a very Michael Benz is outstanding on this. He's like a leading figure on this. He's explaining so well what's really going on behind the scenes, all the back channels, the carrots and sticks, as he puts it. And basically, it's what was an outward-facing propaganda and censorship machine being turned on Americans.
Well, that's why the Murthy decision that Amy Coney Barrett authored was so disappointing, because it was a real opportunity to, establish a precedent that in clear terms that the federal government cannot do through private actors what it cannot do itself, which is what it's been doing. Yeah,
I was very disappointed too. It was struck down on standing, so I guess someone might come back and try it again. But it was an opportunity. They shouldn't have struck it down on standing, in my view, and in the view of the dissent. So I was very disappointed too.
What's your? I mean, you're on a college campus. What's your? And you have some sort of, longitudinal perspective. Where are undergrads at George Mason today versus a generation or two ago on this matter?
I think they're worse, like you were describing, where they've been told a lot of things. And I hate to say it, but I'm not that acquainted with that many undergraduates. I focus mostly on graduate students.
Okay.
And so I'm not in a great position. Yeah. Well, and our graduate students and the ones I interact with are not a random sample. We have an economics program
that's true.
Stands out as, and we kind of they sift both into the econ program and into interaction with me in a certain way. So I'm not actually a great observer of the broad campus opinion that way. But, I see what's going on more generally outside of the unusual place of the Department of Economics at George Mason. And in the broader scene, it's very clear that things are not going well. A lot of people are figuring, I don't even want to go to college. Not sure where all this is going, of course.
Well, I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, I understand George Mason's reputation for being a haven of free market thinking. I mean, of course, our late great friend Walter Williams, among others. But I just wonder, like, even those. So even those that get it, I wonder what their threat assessment is if it rises to the same level as yours.
I think many students, I do know enough undergraduate students who, kind of see things my way, and they definitely feel that most of their professors are left-wing. They can't speak too freely, or if they do, they're concerned about being marked down. I think that's pervasive, that problem. But I don't have any special window to it, is all I'm saying.
Well, I hear you. Professor Daniel Klein, professor of economics at George Mason, as we were discussing, author of Misinformation is a Word We Use to Shut You Up. Professor Klein, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
I'm worried about Mom. She's having a tough time moving around the house.
Oh, I know. She still thinks she can do everything on her own.
Exactly, but I've been over there every day this week, helping her navigate the stairs, cooking meals, reminding her to take her medicine. I'm always nervous when I leave.
You know what? I admire you for taking care of Mom. But your family needs you too. And what if she slips and falls? A friend recommended the caregivers at Senior Helpers of Naperville Southwest. They service Cook, DuPage, Kane, and Will counties. They guarantee compatibility and they'll conduct a free safety assessment of her home. Plus, they'll provide as little or as much care as Mom needs.